everybody, welcome back on Lit Up with Annie. In this session, we are going to begin with post-structuralism. We've completed structuralism and we saw that how structuralism it focused on textual analysis, it paid close attention to the language and the form of the text, and it was very formulaic, right? So what was the main focus of structuralism was to seek an order. It thought that, okay, once we find out what is there in the text, what are the core elements of the text, and we unravel the core elements, we will be able to understand the meaning of the text. Then what happened, somewhere around 1960s, mid 20th century, literary critics and philosophers began to rebel against that kind of an analysis, structuralism. And they started rebelling against what they saw as a very restrictive kind of a model, paying very close attention to the text and nothing else. Even paying close attention to the structures, whatever they were. So they thought that it was very restrictive and very limited critical practice of viewing the world. So it was in the 1960s. And that was the beginning of post-structuralism. Let's begin. Post-structuralism is a theoretical framework that emerged in the mid-20th century, somewhere around 1960s, primarily in the field of philosophy, literary theory, and social sciences. It is considered a continuation and a critique of structuralism, a previous intellectual movement that sought to analyze and understand the underlying structures and systems that shape human experiences and language. So as we just saw, yes, it was a critique of structuralism, but on the other hand, we can also say that it was a continuation of structuralism. Look at the way we write post-structuralism. There is no gap between post and structuralism, and we don't even put a hyphen. Post-structuralism is written together as a word. It's a continuation, we can say, of structuralism. So post-structuralism, we can also say it emerged as a rupture, a shift away from what prominent thinkers saw as formulaic, ordered work of structuralists. Who were the notable figures in post-structuralism? This is important, you can write this with you. Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Roland Barthes, Julia Kristeva, Kyle Stilluse, and Jacques Lacan. Lacan, more importantly, we will be doing in psychoanalytic criticism, but Lacan has done a lot of work in language also. Both actually, language and psychoanalysis. Okay, and we'll talk about Lacan when we do psychoanalysis. Also, Giles Deleuze has often closely worked with Guattari, and often they have the names are taken together, Deleuze and Guattari. You can write that name also. So Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Roland Barthes, and you all know that Roland Barthes we also discussed in structuralism, the last one. And I said that Roland Barthes is usually considered a bridge between structuralism and post-structuralism. And we'll talk about the post-structuralist phase of Roland Barthes. Julia Kristeva is there, Deleuze and Guattari, and then Jacques Lacan. If we look at Roland Barthes just a little bit, not very much in detail right now, we'll see that he was the first one actually to talk about the openness of a text. We saw in the structuralist phase how Roland Barthes talked about intertextuality, right? How one text may refer to so many other texts and intertextual elements are there. And he was also the first one to talk about the role of readers in a text. So that is how Roland Barthes is a very important figure when we talk, both Roland Barthes and Derrida, when we talk about post-structuralism. But before I move on to talk about Derrida and Barthes, in this session, I am going to focus upon Michel Foucault, the first one. Foucault. Michel Foucault, one interesting thing about Michel Foucault is that he did not consider himself as a post-structuralist. His ideas are actually labeled as post-structuralist, but he never wanted himself to be labeled as a post-structuralist. So he was born in 1926, he died in 1984, was a highly influential French philosopher and social theorist who made significant contributions to the development of post-structuralism. Foucault's ideas challenge conventional notions of power, knowledge, subjectivity, and is often associated with concepts like disciplinary power, discourse analysis, and archaeology of knowledge. You all must have heard these terms. Sometimes, if we don't know, if we have not read and we don't understand these terms come as very heavy upon us, discourse. And there is Michel Foucault who has talked about knowledge, power, but what? Then discourse analysis, archaeology of knowledge. But they're not very difficult to understand. Okay, let's begin. The key concepts of Michel Foucault. The first one that we discuss is power knowledge. This is the most famous idea of Foucault actually, power in knowledge. He argued that power operates through various forms of knowledge and that knowledge itself is often used as a tool of power. This means that institutions, authorities, and social structures use knowledge to control and shape individuals and society. The first thing that we will understand here is power and knowledge are inseparable here, according to Foucault. He says that whoever has the hold of power has means to shape individuals, shape societies, thinking about the world, perception of the world. How? Let's take an example, okay? What he says is that, for example, we have let's take an example of a doctor. You all know that a doctor is in a position of power in a hospital with his patients, right? The doctor will tell something to the patient, maybe use some very heavy words, the medicine vocabulary, and the patient will have no other choice but to listen to the doctor and blindly follow what the doctor has to say, right? Now what happened here? Doctor was in a position of a power and he had control of the knowledge. Because he is a doctor, he has all knowledge of medicine, and because he is in the position of power, he was able to control and shape the patients who come to him or her. And this you can apply everywhere. You can take any other example of power in knowledge, and that's what Foucault says, that power operates through various forms of knowledge and knowledge itself is often used as a tool of power. और इन्होंने ये भी कहा है बहुत बार कि ज़रूरी नहीं है कि knowledge जो है वो stable हो, ऐसा ज़रूरी नहीं है. No, it is not stable at all. It keeps on changing. Somebody else will come in power और उनका the other person who will come in power will control knowledge in his or her own way, and therefore it will change. Alright, so this concept has been introduced in various works actually. He has talked about it, notably in Discipline and Punish, one of his very famous works, and The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, which is called An Introduction, 1975-1976. The second concept that we'll talk about is discourse analysis. First of all, we need to understand what discourse is. So discourse is actually a kind of a communication, a language through which we actually perceive the world. Discourse ज़रूरी नहीं है that spoken, it has to be a spoken or a written word, no. It could be in the form of a sound, it could be in the form of an image, a video clip, anything actually, through which you can communicate or you can have a perception of the world. That's a discourse. अब इमेजिन करो आप कोई एक पिक्चर देखो जिसमें कुछ भी है, मतलब पिज्ज़ा, एक बहुत नॉर्मल सी पिक्चर हम देखते हैं. You travel and you see big hoardings of a pizza and they show you different things through an image. That's also a discourse. Okay. Foucault has talked about discourse analysis. Foucault developed a method of analysis known as discourse analysis. He examined the ways in which language and knowledge construct particular discourses that define and regulate what is considered true, normal, or acceptable within a given historical and cultural context. Very interesting this is. Foucault ने क्या किया, एक एनालिसिस करने का तरीका ढूंढा, डिस्कोर्स एनालिसिस उसको नाम दिया. उन्होंने एग्जामिन किया कि लैंग्वेज और नॉलेज कैसे डिस्कोर्सेस को कंस्ट्रक्ट करते हैं, जो डिफाइन करते हैं और रेगुलेट करते हैं कि क्या चीज़ नॉर्मल है, क्या चीज़ एक्सेप्टेबल है एक सोसाइटी में, हिस्टोरिकली या फिर कल्चरली, कोई भी किसी भी तरह. जैसे हम यू मस्ट हैव हर्ड ट्रूथ के बारे में कि सबका अपना अपना सच होता है, या फिर सच जो है वो ज़रूरी नहीं है कि उसकी भी एक ही साइड हो, है ना. तो ये कह रहे हैं कि हमें एग्जामिन करना है कि लैंग्वेज किस तरह से कंस्ट्रक्ट करती है पर्टिकुलर डिस्कोर्सेस को दैट डिफाइन एंड रेगुलेट what is considered true, normal or acceptable within a given historical or cultural context. अगर हम एग्जाम्पल लें, if we take a larger example of history, governments keep on changing and many a times you will see additions and subtractions to your history books, and sometimes we see so many changes historically, right? कभी कभी क्या होता है that one aspect of history is focused upon and sometimes some other aspect of history is focused upon. अब क्या दोनों जो हमने हिस्ट्री पढ़ी वो गलत थी? नहीं ना. लेकिन किस तरह से पावर बदल गई, तो नॉलेज कंस्ट्रक्ट किस तरह से हुआ, क्या चीज़ें आई which are now considered true or normal or acceptable, that changed. So that's what Foucault examined, the ways in which language and knowledge construct, ये दोनों मिल के किस तरह से कंस्ट्रक्ट करती हैं पर्टिकुलर डिस्कोर्सेस को that define and regulate what is considered as normal, true or acceptable in a society. So he has talked about discourse again in various works, including the Archaeology of Knowledge, 1969. That's another term, Archaeology of Knowledge. That's the work also, Archaeology of Knowledge, and in the same work he talks about it. It's actually to study historical conditions of knowledge production. History में जाके historical conditions क्या थी जिस time पे a particular knowledge had been produced maybe. So that's what archaeology of knowledge is, to going back into those historical conditions and finding out the way or how the knowledge was produced. He analyzed how different epistemes, what are epistemes? Systems of knowledge or small units of knowledge, how those emerged, how it evolved and eventually gave way to new forms of knowledge. So basically to understand the production of knowledge, the evolution of knowledge, maybe how it was spread and how that particular knowledge gave way to other forms of knowledges. Archaeology of knowledge. The next concept is panopticism, Panopticon. So Foucault introduced the concept of Panopticon, drawing from Jeremy Bentham's architectural design for a prison. Oh, I thought that I'll put a picture, but I forgot. Anyway, सो जेरेमी बेंथम का एक आर्किटेक्चरल डिज़ाइन था प्रिजन का. वो कैसा था? ऐसे सर्कल में. इमेजिन कर लो, हिस्ट्री लिटरेचर की क्लास है तो आपकी इमेजिनेशन स्ट्रांग होनी चाहिए. सो इमेजिन कर लो एक सर्कुलर आर्किटेक्चरल एक डिज़ाइन है, उसके बीच, एंड इट्स अ प्रिजन. ओके, देयर आर सेल्स, सारे सर्कल में सेल्स हैं. बीच में देर आर सीसीटीवी कैमरास which face towards all sides. Maybe it is revolving. So now, it's not that at any particular time one cell is not being seen or the other is being seen. No. At all times, these people, these prisoners are being watched. They are being observed. So all of these prisoners have this in their mind that I am being watched. तो इससे क्या होगा आप सोचो. अगर आपको पता है कि फुल टाइम आपके ऊपर नजर है किसी की, यू आर बीइंग वॉच्ड ऑल द टाइम, isn't it that your mind will start behaving, or your mind will tell you to behave in a particular manner which is acceptable by the ones who are observing you. तो सेल्फ डिसिप्लिन आ जाता है. वहाँ से ये कॉन्सेप्ट लिया है फुको ने जेरेमी बेंथम के डिज़ाइन से. Panopticon is actually a metaphor for modern surveillance. He took the example of a prison, but he applied it to modern scenario, modern surveillance society, where individuals are under constant observation and internalize the gaze of power, leading to self-regulation and discipline. How are we being watched in this modern society? You open an app, it asks you for your location, and sometimes without even reading you allow. Many a times you go to different places, let's say a hospital, or there are schools, there are boarding schools where there are CCTV cameras everywhere, and it is written you are under surveillance. You go to shops, big malls, you are under surveillance. That's the modern surveillance society. And these days, so many, you must have heard so many cyber crimes which are related to this. You visit so many different apps, and without reading, many times we accept the terms and conditions also. So modern surveillance society. I don't know if you watched this TV series Black Mirror, but there was this particular episode in that series which actually was very weird. Every episode in that is weird, but this one in particular, what happens is that there is this woman and she has a husband. They are watching a particular app, जैसे Netflix है वैसे उस पे एक, I forgot the name. They open that and they start watching a series. They are looking कि क्या देखें, and then they find this particular thumbnail which shows a woman. She has the look of the woman who's actually watching the series. तो वो दोनों एक दूसरे की तरफ देखते हैं कि यार ये तो तुम्हारी तरह लग रही है, चलो चलाते हैं. And some bad words are written for that woman. Once they start playing that, it actually shows the entire life of that woman, and they're shocked, and obviously the life is disturbed. The husband leaves her and everything is disturbed. Whatever she's doing in her real life is being displayed being seen by everybody. It is because it is there in that TV series. And finally when she tries to understand कि ये कैसे हो रहा है, तो उसको पता चलता है कि वो जो ऐप है, जब आपने उसको सब्सक्राइब किया था तो उसमें टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस का वो एक पेज था जिसको आपने अलाउ किया, एक्सेप्ट किया. उसमें लिखा था दैट एट एनी पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम if a series is made, it can be taken from your life, it can be inspired by your life, and you are while you are allowing us to view, while you are agreeing to the terms and conditions, you are also allowing us to have a close look at you through it. So basically कुछ था कि उसने वो allow करके she gave free pass to the company to have a close look at her life, personal life, so that they can artificial intelligence से था वो सारा, ताकि उसकी लाइफ पे बेस्ड एक टीवी सीरीज बन जाए. So it was that dangerous. So Foucault उस टाइम पे मिड 20th सेंचुरी में he was talking about this, where individuals are under constant observation and internalize the gaze of power, leading to self-regulation and discipline. So back to the gaze of power. When you know that you are being watched, then you will lead yourself to self-regulation and discipline. It is discussed in the work Discipline and Punish, The Birth of Prison, 1975. The next term is subjectivity. Subjectivity has been talked by a lot of theorists in different theories. Foucault also talked about it. Foucault ke according he questioned the notion of a fixed essential self or subject. Basically Foucault ke liye subjectivity is not stable. What is subjectivity? You as a subject to something. अब अगर हम फेमिनिज्म की बात करें तो फेमिनिस्ट्स जब सब्जेक्ट की बात करती हैं, सब्जेक्ट एंड अदर, सब्जेक्ट इज एट अ पोजिशन ऑफ पावर एंड द अदर, इफ दैट्स अ वुमन, इज नॉट इन द पावर. बेसिकली सब्जेक्ट जो है वो इज अप इन द हायरार्की. बट फूको के कॉन्सेप्ट में ऐसा नहीं है. फूको का जो सब्जेक्ट है वो है सब्जेक्ट टू अ डिस्कोर्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल हमने डॉक्टर वाला एग्जाम्पल लिया था. डॉक्टर इज इन द पोजिशन ऑफ पावर, while if you are the patient, you are the subject of the doctor, you are the subject in the discourse. Foucault says that subjectivity is not fixed. He argued that subjectivity is not inherent, but it is constructed through various power relations and discourses. At one point of time, you are under one particular discourse. However, tomorrow you might not be under that discourse. You might be maybe a subject to some other discourse. So it is constructed. Subjectivity is constructed. Individuals are positioned and constituted as subjects within particular historical and cultural contexts. Discussed throughout various works, including Madness and Civilization, 1961, and Birth of Clinic, 1963. जितने भी ये टेक्स्ट्स हैं, दे आर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. प्लीज रिमेंबर द डेट्स ऑल्सो. बहुत बार फूको से क्वेश्चन मैच द फॉलोइंग में आया ही आया है. Another term is biopower. Foucault's exploration of how power operates through the management and regulation of life processes, including population, health, and sexuality. Biopower. He's talking about power again, but this time biologically. He says how society actually regulates even life processes. Population, how by birth controlling pills hain, health, sexuality, all of these things. This has been introduced in the work The History of Sexuality, Volume 1. And further on, he develops on it in various other works. Let's talk about the major books that you have to remember. Foucault, I told you, Foucault is associated with post-structuralism. His work is associated with post-structuralism, though it is important to note that Foucault himself did not identify as a post-structuralist. Nevertheless, his ideas and contributions have had a significant impact on the development of post-structuralist thought. The first book is Madness and Civilization. Subtitle is A History of Insanity in the Age of Reason, 1961. This book explores the historical treatment of madness and the emergence of modern concept of mental illness. बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग इनका काम रहा है फूको का. तो कैसे हिस्टोरिकली मैडनेस को कैसे ट्रीट करते थे, एंड देन इमर्जेंस ऑफ मॉडर्न कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ मेंटल इलनेस. ही टॉक्स अबाउट दैट. मैडनेस इन सिविलाइजेशन. The Birth of the Clinic, An Archaeology of Medical Perception, 1963. Foucault examines the history of medical practices and the development of clinical knowledge. Again, archaeology. Then, The Order of Things, An Archaeology of Human Sciences. He presents a critique of human sciences and their epistemological foundations. Then we have Discipline and Punish, very important work. The Birth of Prison, 1975. This seminal work analyzes the historical shift in penal practices from public torture and execution to modern systems of incarceration and surveillance. Panopticon, इसी में उसकी बात किया है. Then the History of Sexuality, this is in 3 volumes. Volume 1, Introduction, 1976. He explores the historical construction of sexuality and how sexuality became an object of scientific study and social control. If you go back even further on, when we go on to read so many authors, we'll discuss about sexuality and what happened to those people. You might have seen, we'll talk about that later, otherwise the discussion will go very long. Volume 2, The Use of Pleasure, 1984. This delves into ancient Greek and Roman sexual practices and ethics. Then Volume 3, The Care of Self. This is the final volume of the series. Foucault examines ancient philosophical and ethical practices related to self-care and subjectivity. So this is about the history of sexuality. Discourse on Language, 1971. This book collects a series of lectures in which Foucault analyzes the relationship between language and power. And then a series of interviews bhi hai, which is called Power and Knowledge. Selected interviews and other writings, 1972 se leke 77 tak, and it was published in 1980. It compiles interviews and other writings by Foucault, touching on his major themes of power and knowledge. So these are the major books of Foucault. And now we will quickly revise with the book. Foucault. So if you have the book, we'll see that he was a professor of history of the systems of thought, developed what he called the archaeology of human sciences, and he studied the rise of forms of knowledge. And then we'll see, he saw scientific inquiry as an exercise in power, where anyone who is in power, like the physician, the scientist, the psychiatrist, what they do is they construct a particular condition as diseased. जैसे एक साइंटिस्ट है या एक साइकियाट्रिस्ट है, वो एक इंसान को बोलेगा ही इज़, कोई भी एक डिजीज़ का नाम दे देगा, एंड वो बोलेगा या बोलेगी दैट दिस इज़ द ऑब्जेक्ट ऑफ टू बी इन्वेस्टिगेटेड, एंड नॉलेज अबाउट दैट is to be carefully controlled by the psychiatrist or by the certain authorities. Knowledge is therefore constructed, organized, shared, and used through particular forms of speech, writing, and language, and which is called discourse. So discourse is the context of speech, representation, knowledge, and understanding. It defines what can be said, studied, and the processes of doing so. It is the context in which meaning itself is produced, discourse. So I'll move on to read the major crux. Foucault underscored the discursive basis of power, social relations and institutions by showing how the so-called objective disciplines like the sciences, ये सारे बहुत objective disciplines हैं, जितने भी sciences हैं, and they rely heavily upon underlying assumptions about the object to be investigated, used particular forms of language and thought in order to talk about this object, and eventually constructed an institution around the object for its study and control. उसको एक object बना दिया अपने patient को, और उसके around एक institution build कर दिया, और फिर discourse दिए गए. That's what he talks about. And then various books have been discussed. Panopticon has been discussed. Genealogy has been discussed. Tracing of the discourses, again going back into the history and tracing the discourses and institutions that have actually formed our ideas of sexuality. कि हमारे दिमाग में जो ये ideas बने हुए हैं, sickness क्या है हमें पता है, ये जो idea हमारे दिमाग में sickness का बना है, sexuality का बना है, crime क्या होता है, हमें क्या पता crime क्या होता है, कैसे पता लगा? तो उन सबको ट्रेस करना, इन सारे डिस्कोर्सेस को ट्रेस करना, दैट्स जीनियोलॉजी. ठीक है. So this is about Foucault. I'll end here and I will continue with post-structuralism and we'll move on to the other theorists. If you liked the video, please share it with others and please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next session.